Mary's Workshop. My name is Anne Marie, and as you know, I love to make things. This video is labeled The Anatomy of a Quilt. I just recently finished one of my 9 makes for this year, and one of them was the Nigerian women quilt. Let me get some more details for you. Before I go any further, if this is the kind of content you like to see, please like, subscribe, and share so we can find all the people who are into the same stuff that we are. The pattern for this quilt is called Nigerian Women, and it's by So Fabulous out of Woodlands, Texas. I bought this pattern here, these lovely ladies here. I bought this applique wall quilt pattern, I believe, at the International Quilt Festival. Now, since I've left the United States a little more than 3 years ago, the International Quilt Festival is always in November. I think I may have had this pattern, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, because I did used to go to the festival often. The thing about making a quilt is that because you're making a quilt out of love, if it's not an urgent situation, like in commemoration of someone's birthday, the birth of a baby or something like that, if it's just for your joy, you should enjoy putting it together, because finding all the different pattern pieces, using different top stitching, all these things come into play, and the quilts evolve as you evolve. Now, one of the best things I learned about quilt making is at the International Quilt Festival in Houston. I used to lament the fact that I had 6 or 7 quilts going, and I may have had maybe 30 or 40 quilts under my belt over time. I used to make them for my women's organization. We used to auction them off for scholarships. Children, I made them. Each one of my children, I made at least 6 or 7, like I'm Amish, right? To go on their way. Weddings, I think you've seen a few of those. I think I'll put them over here. That I've done for weddings in the past, say 2 years. I love to gift a quilt and some cash, because young couples need cash as well as blankets. So, I've been working on this quite a long time. Now, what I learned at the International Quilt Festival is I started, beside being awed by the level of workmanship and colors and ideas and craftsmanship and all of the good stuff that comes into a great quilt festival, is on the panel that they put, like an information panel, like when you're at the museum, they would tell you how long the person had been working on the quilt. And some of the most stunning quilts, had been working on them 7, 12, 8, 7 years. And that freed me, because currently I may have maybe 4 or 5 quilts in the funnel. And I work on them as either they're needed or as I got inspiration. So at the beginning of this year, I started getting on board with the planning and the 9 makes challenge, and I put 3 quilts on my 9 makes channel, simply because I want to get them on their way and speed them on to the people that they need to go to. I only sew for people I love, so the quicker I can get them into their hands, the better. So this quilt, Nigerian Women, I've had for quite some time. I love everything about it. I love the applique. I love the size of the women. I love the Ankara fabric. I love all of this stuff. And what I just finished completing was the necklaces and the bracelets, which, you know, African women always have on. Earrings, bracelets, all that good stuff. Anyway, so I wanted to walk you through my process. All right, so now this is not showing you everything that's on the quilt, but it kind of gives you an overview of how this quilt has come together. I will take it outside when it's not raining and carrying on, because we've had quite a few storms. I will take it outside so that you can see it in the sunshine. I have clotheslines out there. I'll hang it there, or I'll lay it on the front steps, which is a great display place for quilts I make. Anyway, so first things first, I was intrigued by this pattern. And then, so the very first thing I did was I appliqued these women. So let me show you the pattern. Now, these are my trusty rusty Ziploc bags. As I get inspired on different quilts, I start a bag and I put things in them. I know how long I've had this because I know how long ago it was for me to get the grass. Okay, so this was the pattern pieces that I pieced together. I'm not sure if yeah, I did. That's what I did. I pieced them together. I also cut them out. I numbered all of the pieces are all numbered, right? And then I pieced on wax paper, because wax paper you can iron on your fabric and it will stick. Each individual piece of the picture I cut out. So say this is number 8. This is part number 8 on the pattern. Ooh, sorry, upside down. On the pattern piece right here, right here. All right, so that's one of the things I did. I cut out each individual piece, which you'll see inside this. Oh, did they just fall out? Yes, so a Ziploc bag inside a Ziploc bag. These are all the individual pieces. This is their little coronas, their little head pieces, hair pieces around their head. So I cut those individual pieces out. And then I also keep the larger pattern so I can kind of get an idea. Now, in the past, I would have colored these in with colored pencils or something, so I could kind of get an idea of what kind of coloring I wanted to have happen in this quilt. Guys, I am not a master of color theory. I wish I was, but my trusty rusty color wheel is. So when I kind of get an inspiration of what I wanted to have happen, then it was very easy to start coming up with different hues that work. Now, amazingly, these colors on this quilt will look wonderful in my daughter's house, and that was at least 10 years ago when I started this. Okay, so let me show you some of the things. All right, first things first, one of the things I was inspired about the most when I first started this quilt was I wanted this effect of very tall grass. One of my dearest friend's daughter was in the Peace Corps in Africa at the time, and some of the pictures that she showed of the village she was staying in and the people she was staying with kind of inspired me for that. So I found this fabric at a quilt store in Houston, and I thought this was the look I wanted to have behind my Nigerian ladies. I stitched along the very edge here so I could fray this to be more like real grass. This fabric at the top that I was going to use to make the background, or the sky, as you can see, I didn't go for a traditional blue sky. I kind of like the idea of the northern lights, even though this is kind of in Africa. I did like this panorama around it, and I found a center point on my ladies here, and I drew lines to give them a kind of a sunburst effect, and I stitched them in a shiny blue fabric that you can see if you're close up, but if you're not, it won't distract you. Okay, now each of these individual, oh my goodness, these are all different scraps from different parts of my life. That's another thing I love about making quilts, is that you see different fabrics and you know where they came from. So first of all, this is Guatemalan fabric that a friend brought back for me. This is an African fabric that was in some of my Dress a Girl Around the World outfits. This is one of those wonderful tent Vogue dresses that with the dashiki pattern that I finally got around to. These are some of the doll making prints that I use when I make dolls at the bottom here. And these bottom pieces of their dresses are from a quilt material that is so amazing that I got in House of Fashion in downtown Houston. Let me show you this fabric so you can understand what I'm talking about. Now, this fabric has been quilted in so many different African fabrics, and I just used a small amount of it to make the bottom of that skirt. I also have a quilt completely made in this fabric, but this is what's left over. And so because I haven't run into these quilted fabrics done in Ankara fabrics, I'm really hesitant about when I'm going to use it, but it doesn't make sense to have it in a bucket. It needs to be out in the world. All right, over on this side over here, I will show you that same kind of fabric done in purples that I had in my Ankara week dress that I made, a reversible dress. And I love the patchwork Ankara. They're very hard to find, but I love when I run across them. Okay, one of my subscribers asked me how I applique my quilt pieces together when I do applique work. I do know how to do the blind stitch applique where you turn under the corner and then you use your sharps and you go along the edge where you won't see any sort of stitching and everything. But what's happened now is that I've gotten older, my eyesight has made that kind of stitching a little bit more difficult, especially my lighting here in this particular house. And so I've taken to doing a lot more satin stitching because I'm more productive that way. I'm actually getting the quilts done. When I was doing it by hand, they were just dragging on too long, even for me. So what I usually do is I set my machine to the stitch length to be 0.5 and the width initially to be 2.5. Now that stitch setting is the base satin stitch that I'm going to use to go around the outer edges of these applique pieces, and then I'm going to come back and widen the stitch width to about 3.5, and I'm going to follow that initial stitching through the center of the teeth of my presser foot, and I'm going to go over it to give it that nice satin finish. Now, if you go over it one time and it still looks like there's spaces in your satin stitch, you can go over it again. It's just a very even hand as you pull it through. You don't want to linger too long in a space and get that bubble that you're going to have to rip out. Now that was my initial zigzag stitch, and you can see that there are little gaps and things like that, but you don't have to worry about that because this is going to be secured to the quilt top. So you're going to go back over this with a wider satin stitch when it's attached to the quilt back. Let me stitch. I'll show you the effect that I'm talking about on her face here. All right, one second. Okay, so this is the coverage I want. I had to go over it 2 times to get the coverage I wanted without that too much of a gap. It really kind of depends upon the fabrics that you're dealing with. I tend to use 100% cotton, but this is a Guatemalan cotton weave, and this is has a bit more of a plush effect to it. It's dull for to match the color of the lady's skin. So I want it to be a little bit more secure because this indeed is a blend. It's not 100% cotton. So if I want it to last, I had to make a different fabric choice. But the rest is cotton. So I want to make it very, very secure against this edge because that's where it would fray in about 20 or 30 years. Now this just shows how adding 20-minute segments of sewing can advance your project. With these 2 20-minute blocks, I was able to applique the pieces together on the web backing, and then I was able to do the second set of satin stitches and place them on top of my quilt front, and all that's left now to do is to, well, that's not all that's left to do, but the next step is to satin stitch the borders with the right colors to the background piece. There's more to do, but I'm getting there. Now moving on to the borders, if you can see, this brown fabric has a print on it like almost like crocodile scales or tree bark, but I just absolutely loved it, and I ended up stippling to give it more texture on top. And then on the very borders, I did some 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares of different scraps that I have left off from different fabrics that I thought were in the same color wheel as the rest of this quilt. This is bias tape. Thank you, Marisol's Curves. I created from a what's it called? A trench coat kind of dress, or a coat dress, and I had some left over, and it's a lovely batik. It changes colors as it goes down. It goes into purples and mauves, and these are all leftover scraps. I took the time, because I had time now, and I used my embroidery machine to put these kind of pseudo Africanized fleur-de-lis on every other one of these squares. And so that took a day, but it was my pleasure. And I used some decorative thread that I've been carrying around for a couple of decades, but they're gone now. And I will show you the back. Now, y'all, by now you should know where I found this fabric. I found this fabric at Ping's in Mandeville, Jamaica. This is a ginkgo leaf, and all the colors correspond to the colors that I have on the front of the quilt. And I just thought it was beautiful, and I decided to back the quilt with this, and I'm very pleased with the results. All right, so let's talk about construction. I love to piece quilts. I love to conceptualize quilts. I don't like to quilt quilts. Which, if you don't like to quilt, why do you quilt then? Well, that's how it is. I just am doing the best I can with what I love. So I make my quilts so that they are manageable. I'm sure if I was in the United States, I was hemming and hawing about that quilting machine, y'all. When the kids left, I thought, oh, I have a room. I can set up that quilting machine. And I was so close to ordering it because I've been saving for it for decades. But luckily for me, I didn't do it because I would have had to have shipped it here. And while this room has a lot of space, it would not have enough space for the quilting machine. So what I had to do was I was inspired by a book, and when I find that book, I will add it in the link, about how to quilt and sew your quilt as you're putting it together. In the past, I would have done the top, I would have added the sides, the borders on the sides, on the edge. Then I would have stitched the background on the top, on the back, turned it inside out, or I would have stitched the whole thing. It's too much. It's too much. So what I do now is I conceptualize my quilts in blocks. So what I did first was the center. So the center of the quilt that has the two ladies standing in the field, I did first. And so I put, this particular quilt has a flannel, a recycled flannel interior, because I don't really need thick, heavy quilts anymore because of where I am. And where this is going doesn't need it also. So I was able to sandwich layer. I had the ginkgo backing, I had the batting, and then I had the top. And this width is manageable under the arm of my sewing machine. So I started off with satin stitching my my applique ladies in place. I think I have a picture of that. I will insert that somewhere around here. I put it on a backing. I stitched it in place, and then I went back later and stitched it onto the middle of the piece, sandwiched all the pieces together, and then did all of the top stitching on my machine. There are wavy lines. Let me go ahead and show you. So there are wavy lines sewn into the grass to help give it even more movement. As I told you, the sunburst is stitched in place in the background. After all of the pieces were satin stitched in place, I stitched a nimbus around each one of the figures. I did this one in a darker satin sparkle thread because I wanted it to appear as if this person was in front of this person, and then the sun is glowing behind her. So that these were stitched on top, and then all of the top stitching was done before I ever did the sides. All right, so this bag had all kinds of inspiration I had to use on this quilt. I was thinking of putting these crochet doily medallions on some of the pieces. I still may do it. I have about 18 of them. I might put them along the edge. I'll stitch them on by hand though. I had an idea because this color palette of these large buttons, but I'm moving away from having any kind of button on a quilt because of animals and children. Quite a few of my quilts have been loved to death by dogs and puppies and such, and they focus on things like this. I don't want this to happen to any little kid. So I ditched the idea of the buttons because this was the second quilt I thought I was going to use them on, and then I thought better of it. And then I think I am going to add these medallions. I think they're really, really pretty. They're coasters. I've had them, I've put them on a few quilts. An Asian influenced one, and this South American gaucho one from Argentina inspired quilt that I have behind me. But I think I'm going to use these. Each side piece was stitched the same way. The ginkgo at the back, the what do they call that fabric? Oh dear. All right, so the side borders were all stitched individually, and they were sandwiched with the ginkgo fabric at the back, the flannel in the center, and then the fashion fabric on the top. And because it was thin and I was able to handle it, I was able to use my stipple attachment, my freehand motion presser foot, in order to stitch and create all this texture on this. Now remember, this was not attached to this or this. This was by itself. And then I will tell you how I attach them. When I am working on each individual piece, I leave about 1/4 to 1/2 inch distance that is not stitched on the side of the pieces that I'm working on, because I'm going to use these to stitch to the other piece, and then I'm going to trim the flannel so that it lays flat. So for instance, let me show you an example. For instance, this is the outer border. All right, it is not attached all the way to the edge of the fabric of the flannel and the backing. So I'm going to attach the fashion fabric to the other fashion fabric, and I'm going to stitch like 1/4 of an inch along the side, and that will create an attachment, right? So then I'm going to go back and I'm going to trim this to 1/8. I'm going to trim this fabric. After I've done that, I'm going to trim this flannel so that it lays flat, so very, very close to the line. And then one part of the fabric on the back is going to be underneath, and then the other is going to be, it's going to fit over the top, and I'm going to go around and stitch the back in place. So it will look like, here's an example. All right, so I have invisible stitched the backing down. So it's attached by machine in the front, flat, and then in the back I'll go back and I'll trim out all the inside, and then I will flap over one of these edges and I will invisible stitch. Now, on a large quilt, this will take a couple hours, but nothing compared to trying to manage a quilt this size underneath my regular sewing machine. It's great if you have a quilting machine so you can lay it out flat, but I don't have one. So I added this border to the center square. Then afterwards I came back and added these border strips to this border, and then all I had left to do was to add my bias strip binding to the edge. All right. Now I don't know if quilting is your thing. It's my thing. I love the time of year. This is my quilting time. But this year is the first year I did quilt quite a bit in the summer and in the spring because I set a plan. But this quilt is on its way to my beloved daughter. I hope she's not watching this video. I'm hoping I hope, like typical kids, they're all ignoring me and not watching this video. But I am going to make a plate for the back of the quilt. Now, I took a poll to see if you thought my Nigerian women needed earrings, and you said that they do. So I have put the earrings in place, and the only thing left to do on this quilt is to put the quilt plate on. Now, this quilt is in honor of my daughter Nicole. She's turning 36 this year. And I wanted to make her something special, something to remember me by. And I printed out a dedication and a picture of the two of us to put on the back. Nicole, in commemoration of your 36th year on the planet, you've brought love, light, and badassery from Anne Marie, aka Mommy, who will always be by your, who loves you and will always be by your side, and on her birthday. So now it's been some time. This package is almost empty. It is by Jenkins Company. I don't know if they're still in business, but they're the ones that I got my fabric sheets that go through the printer, and then you set them with the iron after you're finished. I'll show you what I'm gonna do, but I'm pretty sure if this company doesn't have it, I'll look on the internet and see if someone else sells them. Remember, you have to print on the photo or the cardstock setting. I learned that the hard way. Okay, so I'm at the stage where I'm going to just peel off the fabric from the backing. Well, it wasn't that hard with the other ones. Yeah, here we go. Alrighty, and you could save the other pieces, but I don't want to take the chance. So here it is, and they want you to lay it face down on your ironing board. Let me get that in place for you. And you're going to iron on the back to set the ink. No steam, please. No steam. Okay. Now, don't iron it on the front. You're just setting. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna let this cool a bit, and I'm gonna go get the next step. Now, next, I'm going to rinse this in some Bubble Jet Set, which is by the same J. Jenkins Company. I have not finished all that I have bought, so I don't know if they're still in business. I'll have to let you know. But you rinse this to help it really set, and you don't rinse it out. You just rinse it with that. And I'm taking that next step because one day she's gonna wash the quilt. Some baby or someone, some doggy is gonna mess with the quilt, and I'd like my message to her to make it. So after you rinse it, you set it out to dry. You can blow dry it. I don't have time for that. I got jumpsuits to make. But I'm gonna lay it outside in the sun while it is still sunning before the monsoon starts again. And when it dries, you'll see me sew it to the back of the quilt, and then she's ready to go to her new home. Okay, all dry. Time for one more pressing. Then I'm going to trim and add to the back of the quilt, and then we'll be done. Just giving myself a little help with figuring out what to stitch under. Okay, so I'm going to trim some of this extra material off, and I thought I would take a minute to chat with you about quilts. Now, some people make quilts for many reasons. I love to sew, and I love to express myself in fabric, and I just love the idea of a story being told on a blanket and how quilts get passed down. And I remember watching a show when I was a young woman about the Amish and how, as young women, they would complete, say, about 12 to 14 quilts to go in their hope chest. If y'all remember hope chest, y'all remember hope chest? Wow. Anyway, so they would put them inside of to start their households, and I thought, that is so cool. I mean, it could have also been workbenches and tools and things like that, but I just thought that was so cool. So I was intrigued by quilting. I'm kind of a little self-taught. I would go to the quilt shows, buy quilt books. Nobody in my immediate family quilts, even though there's quite a bit of crafters in my family. Foremost, my mom, who was like trained by the nuns. And so, of course, she could do all of that stuff that women traditionally were taught, like back in the day. She could sew, knit, crochet, tat, which are those kind of pillows with the crisscross tucks and everything in them. And she could do any number of things. She could embroider and make the flowers look like they were lifelike. It's the most stunning thing. I was not talented that way. I was talented with big construction, big concepts, big construction, and luckily the universe gifted me hands to match. So this is where I'm going to put my book plate. Oh, sorry, not a librarian. My quilt plate on the edge of the quilt. So let me get some white thread and start to sew this in place, and I will speed that up for you. All right, so I am going to thread my needle, wax my thread. That was something that when I was a beginning sewer, I never did, but oh, it sure does help. Well, you can see now that I wax, given the state of this wax container, and I must have at least 5 or 6 of these, but it helps hold your thread together and let it slide through the hole easily. So I have made quilts for, oh my goodness, so many people who got married, so many charitable organizations, and all of my children, and I just love making them. They're like a legacy for me. When I'm gone, I would love to know that some grandchild is dragging the quilt around and it's all beat up and has holes in it and smells like them and, and all that good stuff. And I think that's what keeps me making them. Also the colors. I do love to make an art quilt now. I'm inspired by different concepts, not necessarily. I do like to put some traditional patchwork in all of my quilts, as evidenced by, you know, my traditional well, this is like a 4-inch square, and then I did a bit of embroidery, quilting on top. But I do also like to throw in some unusual accents. These crochet pieces I love putting in there. And that's the end of them. I have them on another quilt featuring gauchos and Hispanic ladies and gentlemen with lassos and everything that I made for, it's one of the quilts I made for my son. I also made 5 million t-shirt quilts because my kids played all sorts of sports, but specifically soccer for more than half of their lives. So we had quite a bit of t-shirts plus high school shirts, which I think is kind of interesting because when you go to Europe or different places, and I try to get a college t-shirt as something to bring back, not everybody's into it. Not everybody is into it as like us Americans about advertising our allegiance to our college. So I found that very interesting. But like I said, I've made a lot of, I think I'll do a tutorial on a t-shirt quilt because I have a way of making it where it's easy to manage, because very often these large blankets are very tricky to manage underneath the presser foot and the machine opening. But I hope that you saw by how I put it together, you can see how you can manage each part so that it's something that your sewing machine can handle. Anyway, so my little girl, she is my favorite eldest daughter. Absolute favorite eldest daughter is turning 36. And I don't know where the time went, but she grew into an absolutely spectacular woman. I know everybody likes to feel good about financial and career success, and all that has happened for her. But what I'm the most proud of in being her mom is what a kind, thoughtful, considerate, brave woman that she has become. And that's why she's my favorite oldest daughter. I have 2 other daughters. I have a favorite youngest daughter, and I have a favorite daughter-in-law. But she's so kind. She cares so much, and she's always working to help someone, and she cares about her organization and her people that she's in charge of and the company that she spearheads and is a visionary for. And so I'm just proud of her. So any opportunity I have to express that, I'll take. So I think the next couple of quilts, because I have a few in progress, I do have the one that is coming out on I should be finished by December, which is, honest to God, it's like quilt constipation. It's the one quilt that's just been hanging out there and stopping me up because I so want to make it. It is so going to be so spectacular when it's done. But I have to get through these other quilts that I did this year so that I could make room for it. So I'm going to stop the video for a moment and fast forward this for you, and then we'll wrap this up. C'est fini. That was the last thing to be done, is the quilt plate. I am so proud of myself for finishing this quilt. It was on my 9 makes. I wanted to give it to my child for her 36th birthday, and thank you all so much for keeping me along. I do very well with the plan. I always wanted to be at the stage, like this is not how I started out quilting. This is my evolution in quilting, and I always would see quilts that had plates on the back commemorating the person it was for, and this is one of the few that I've actually been able to get all my technology together, all my stuff together, not moving, not relocating, and could have it done. So this is the anatomy of a quilt. It was conceived, I saw the pattern at a international quilt festival a decade or so ago. All of these materials, almost all of these have been accumulated over time. The border is entirely old projects. All of these things have been in clothes or in other quilts. This has been a coat dress. This border that goes around the edge, this batik. The only thing fairly new is the backing. I love this Ankara that had ginkgo leaves on it. My daughter's a big quilter, and so the concept was from someone else, the center of the quilt, and then the rest was mine. I ran into these cobblestone looking fabric. I don't even know where, but I knew it was for this. I found this grass, I believe, at the quilter's store up near where I used to live, up near up near Kingwood in Houston. And oh my goodness, I've had these little coaster things from the dollar store for at least 20 years. So it all comes together. I love to bead, and so that was fun to include that on them. Thank you all once again for saying yes, they need earrings, because yes, they did need earrings. And this was the anatomy of a quilt. Keep making. I hope you enjoyed it.